Many of our people do not realize how firmly the foundation of our faith has been laid. Light was given that helped us to understand the Scriptures in regard to Christ, His mission, and His priesthood. A line of truth extending from 1844 to the time when we shall enter the city of God was made plain.
All right, the message this afternoon, this is a wake-up call. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 24. We need a little wake-up call, especially because it's afternoon and we just got done with a wonderful lunch, and about this time we get sleepy, but that's not why we need a wake-up call. We need a wake-up call because Jesus is coming back soon. I believe that. And, oh, come on now. I do believe, you look out in the world and you just see the signs of the times and you see the way that men and women are in society nowadays, and you see it, you sense it. Jesus Christ, something's got to happen. And Jesus Christ is going to come back soon. And we need a wake-up call because I don't believe that God's people are ready. I don't feel like I'm ready. But He's trying to get us ready. And I want to be among the people that are ready for when He comes. Matthew chapter 24. Now, Matthew chapter 24, it is the signs of the times. And He gives all these different signs of the end of the world and of His second coming. In verse 42, He says one word that is very important. He says many words, but this word right here, the very first word in verse 42, says to do what? To watch. To watch, therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord doth come. So He gets done with the very signs, and He says to do what? He says to watch. To watch. Why should we watch? Because you don't know. You don't know the hour. You need to be prepared. You need to be prepared for what is coming. You need to be prepared for my coming. So He says to watch. Therefore, turn with me to Matthew chapter 25 and verse 13. He says, watch therefore. Same words. Watch therefore. For you know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man cometh. So He repeats it twice to His disciples. He says to watch. To watch. If He told them to watch and He tells us to watch, He must know that some of us are going to fall asleep. In fact, that's what the parable of the 10 virgins is. It's about the church that has fallen asleep. And He says you need to stay awake and you need to watch. Watch, because you do not know the hour. You don't know when all of these events are going to take place. Mark chapter 13. Now this is a parallel chapter. Mark chapter 13. And verse 33 through 37. Mark chapter 13, verse 33 through 37. He says, Take ye heed, watch and pray, for you know not when the time is. Watch therefore, because you don't know when the coming of the Son of Man will be. Watch and pray, for you know not what the time is. Christ says over and over again to watch, to pay attention. Verse 34, for the Son of Man is as a man taking a far journey, who left his house and gave authority to his servants and to every man his work, and commanded the porter, the doorkeeper, to watch. Watch ye therefore, verse 35, for you know not when the master of the house cometh, at even or at midnight, or at the cock crowing, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly He finds you doing what? Sleeping. And what I say unto you, I say unto everybody. Watch. He says, what I'm saying to you, my disciples, I'm saying to everybody. That includes us. He's saying to us, watch. When I come back, you better not be sleeping. Don't be asleep when I come back. And you don't know when I'm going to come back. So you need to stay awake the whole time. Don't fall asleep. That's His message. He says it over and over again. Don't fall asleep. Don't fall asleep. Stay awake. Watch. Stay awake and watch. Luke chapter 21. He says it over and over again. Watch. Watch. Luke 21, verse 36. Now, if you were a soldier and you were on the watch and you were looking out for an enemy, what would happen to you if you fell asleep? You'd be put to death. It's dangerous. It's a matter of life and death. between falling asleep and between watching. We want to watch. Luke chapter 21 and verse 36, it says, "Watch ye therefore and pray always, that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass and stand before the Son of Man." So what's the reason why we need to be watching? So that we will be able to stand. We'll be able to endure all these things, because it's those that endure unto the end that'll make it. And you want to talk about the remnant. That's the true remnant, those that endure to the end. Those are the ones that are going to be watching. Those are the ones that are going to be waiting. They're the ones that are going to make it to the end. Now, I want to make it to the end. Amen. Okay, not everybody wants to make it to the end. You hoping Jesus puts you to sleep before that time? Are we still asleep from feeling a little groggy from the lunch? Now, I want to make it to the end. If I have to go through, I want to be faithful. I want to be faithful. I don't know about you, but I don't trust myself. I know my weaknesses, and that's why I need Christ. I need His Spirit to abide and live in me. But I need help, because there's so many distractions. Isn't there so many distractions in today's world? They're all around us. It could be a relationship. It can be the TV. It can be this sport or that sport. Or there is a work. That's right, 1,000 ways that the devil has to distract us and lull us into a fatal security, lull us into a sleep. And unfortunately, I know there's been experiences in my life where I've kind of settled down and have kind of lulled into a sleep, and God had to wake me up. And He says, go and do my work. And one of the main reasons why we are in a truck and a trailer and traveling across the USA is because, part of this ministry and ministering to others, do you know that as you minister to somebody else, you're ministered to? That's why God gives each and every one of us a ministry. Because it helps us to be in the Master's work, and it helps us to stay awake. It's always easier to stay awake, when you're tired, late at night, if you're walking around. I had taken a trip to, it was from Colorado, Denver, Colorado, and actually I drove 24 hours straight to California. And it was we left at 6 o'clock in the evening. Now, my children were really little at this time. And so if you've traveled a long distance with children, it's easier to travel at nighttime. Because otherwise, we tried during the daytime, and it was like we got 30 minutes down the road and got to go to the bathroom. Another 10 minutes later, got to get this, and I need that. It's like, I'm driving at night. So I did that. And it was 6 o'clock in the evening when we left. We were in Utah. I think it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I'm getting tired. I'm getting sleepy. You know what I did? About every 30, 40 minutes, I would jump out. And I saw a mountain, so I'd run up the mountain. Or I'd do jumping jacks. Or I'd do push-ups. And you know what? That helped me to stay awake. That activity, physical activity, caused me to stay awake. And it's the same way when we are in God's work. God has a work for us to do, and we're engaged in that work. That helps us to stay awake. When we are working for souls, that helps us to stay awake. So you need to get involved somehow. God has a ministry for you, so get involved because He wants you to stay awake. So what does it mean to watch? What does it mean to watch? Really, because we could place our own interpretation, but what does it really mean to watch? Matthew chapter 25. Go back to Matthew chapter 25. Matthew 25. Actually, I take that back. It's Matthew 26. Matthew 26 and verse 36. Now we're looking at the idea of watching. And Christ says over and over again, and He connects it with end-time events, with the 10 virgins, to watch, to stay awake. Don't fall asleep. And inevitably, the 10 virgins, they all fell asleep anyways. But He's trying to wake us up. He sent a midnight cry to wake us up. Verse 36. Then cometh Jesus with them unto a place called Gethsemane. You're familiar with the story. And saith unto the disciples, Sit ye here, while I go and pray yonder. And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and began to be sorrow and very heavy. Then saith unto him, My soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry ye here, and do what? Watch with me. So Jesus Christ he goes to Gethsemane, and we understand that the weight or the sins are being placed upon him. He says, my soul's heavy. Takes 3 disciples and says, hey, please watch with me. Watch with me. Now, what did he mean by watch? Pray. To pray. Verse 39, it says, and he went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. Now look at verse 40. And he cometh unto the disciples and found them asleep. He says, hey, watch with me. He goes off, and Christ is watching. He's praying. He knows the hour. He knows what the hour is. Which is interesting because if you compare this with John, the Gospel of John, this, basically the Gethsemane experience kind of almost correlates with John chapter 17. John chapter 17 kind of lines up with this right here. So right after John 17, then you have the betrayal. Now, in John 17, what does Jesus say? The very first one, I read it this morning. It says, Father, the hour has come. The hour has come. Now, that's very significant because right before he enters into Gethsemane, he says, the hour has come. What hour is that? Hour of temptation. The hour of his temptation, where the weight of the world, it's his crisis. What's interesting is he calls that an hour, his hour. Did you know that there's an hour for us? It's in the first angel's message. It's called the hour of his judgment has come. And that is the time, during the hour of his judgment, is when we are to be watchful and prayerful. And we need to be watching and praying. So there's a correlation between this time in Gethsemane of Christ and those at the very end of time. I won't get into all the details of that, but verse 40, he says, he found them asleep. And he said unto Peter, what, will you not watch with me 1 hour? So he found them asleep. So you have this contrasting idea. He says, watch, but they weren't watching, they were asleep. So you have, what does it mean to be watching? Stay awake. Simply to stay awake and pray. Stay awake and pray. But they were asleep. Now, how many? There were 4 of them. Peter, James, and John, and Jesus. Out of those 4, when the hour of temptation came, how many were awake? 1. Only 1. Only 1 was awake. That's only a quarter. The other 3 were asleep. The other 3 were asleep. So what does it mean to be asleep? Now, how conscious are you when you are, so now I'm talking about the people that sleepwalk, or dreaming or anything. How conscious are you when you are asleep? None, right? If you're sleeping well. You're unconscious. Okay, you said yeah. I thought you said none, like not at all. So you're not very conscious at all. Not at all, right? You have no consciousness of the time that has passed unless you're kind of restless. But we're talking about a deep sleep where you go to sleep, you don't know what's happening, right? Because you're asleep. You're unconscious of your world around you. You're unconscious of the time, and you're unconscious of what's happening around you. That's what it means to be asleep. And many people today in the church are asleep. They really don't understand the times that we're living in. They don't understand what is happening in our world today. They don't see the crime in the hearts of men and society and the breakdown of society, the breakdown of the family. They're asleep. They're asleep. But to be awake is to understand. I referenced this morning, Desire of Ages chapter 10. Says that John the Baptist, he lived in the wilderness, but he ever studied the hearts of men and the movements of men. He was I forget exact words, but an observer. An interested observer of what was happening around him. And we're to be the same way. We're to observe what is happening because we need to know the times that we're living in to watch and to pray that we will be ready. So when you're conscious, you're asleep, unconscious. When you're asleep, you're unconscious. You don't know what's happening around you. You don't know why. You don't know the time. And this is why death is related to a sleep. You've heard that before. John chapter 11, Jesus says, I'm going to Lazarus. Lazarus is asleep. And what did his disciples say? They said, oh good, if he's sleeping, he'll get better. He says, no. Lazarus is dead. Now we know that death is like a sleep. So those people today, because we're contrasting the idea of watching, of being awake versus being asleep. So you have you're awake or you're asleep. You're conscious or you're unconscious. Like you're basically alive or dead. Turn with me to Ephesians chapter 2. Probably familiar with this passage. And you hath he quickened, who were dead in trespasses and sins. To be spiritually dead is to be laden with trespasses and sins. So not only are we to know and understand the times that we're living in, God wants us to be awake, to be aware, to be alive, and to forsake our trespasses and sin. So the ones that are asleep are those that are basically, we love the world. We love the world, we love our life, we love our lifestyle, we love, let's put it this way, sin. Sin. And that's why Satan has fabricated today a gospel that says you can be saved, just point to your tower, right? You can be saved. Jesus saves you on the cross, no matter what, just say the name of Jesus and you'll be saved. In fact, the extreme end of that is that, you know what? You hardly have to do anything. You're elected, you're predestined to be saved, so you're already saved. God chose you. And so you can't be unsaved because you're chosen. You're predestinated to be saved. Now, I know people that believe that way. Yeah, they're called Calvinists. Yeah, it's an ultra perversion of the gospel. And it's a very fatal and false sense of security. That it doesn't matter, you're chosen, you're the chosen one, you're lucky, all these other people are unlucky. Just go ahead on living life and bask in the idea that God's grace is upon you. But to be dead in trespasses and sins, to be asleep, to be spiritually dead, is to walk the same way as this world, the same course as this world, led by the prince and power of the air. It's talking about those that are disobedient, those that fulfill the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and the Bible calls them the children of disobedience. That's in verse 2 right here. It says, "Where in times past you walked according to the course of this world." It says you used to be that way. You used to be asleep. You used to be dead. According to the prince of the power of the air. Who's that? That's Satan. Satan used to be in control of your life. So if we are dead in trespasses and sins, we're walking according to the enemy. The enemy. And this is why Christ has come to give us life. The spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. This is why God wants us to be awake. He wants us to watch. Now I want to read something very interesting, very fascinating. It's taken from the second volume of the Testimonies, page 204. It's talking about the Gethsemane experience. It says, "The Son of God went away the second time and prayed, saying, O my Father, if this cup may not pass from me, except I drink it, thy will be done. And again he came to his disciples and found them sleeping. Their eyes were heavy." Now listen to this. I hear somebody chuckling. Do you know what you've read this before? You know what the disciples represent. Okay. By these sleeping disciples is represented a sleeping church. By these sleeping disciples is represented a sleeping church. When the day of God's visitation is nigh, during the hour of his judgment, they represent the sleeping church when the day of his visitation is nigh. It is a time of clouds and thick darkness when to be found asleep is most perilous. They were asleep. And many today, that represents the majority of Christians today in Christianity, that in the time, the hour of his judgment, in the time of God's visitation, very soon Jesus is going to come back. Very soon, I believe that we're headed that way, that certain events are going to take place in our world, and we need to be prepared. We need to be prepared. We need to be awake. Jesus has left us this warning. Continues, watch ye therefore. Says he's left a warning. Watch. For you know not when the master of the house cometh, at even or at midnight or at the cock crowing or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. The church of God is required to fulfill her night watch, however perilous, whether long or short. Sorrow is no excuse for her to be less watchful. Tribulation should not lead to carelessness, but to double vigilance. Christ has directed the church by his own example to the source of their strength in times of need, distress, and peril. The attitude of watching is to designate the church as God's people indeed. So who's God's people at the very end of time? Who is it? The attitude of watching is designated the church as God's people indeed. So those that are a part of the church, God's church, indeed, what does indeed mean? Truly. Truly. If you are truly a part of God's church, when the day of visitation is here, when it's at hand, what does it say? It says that the attitude of watching, to being awake, spiritually speaking, to be aware of what is happening in our world, to be aware of what is happening in the church. So those ones that are awake, those are the church. Those are God's people indeed. By this sign, the waiting ones are distinguished from the world and show that they are pilgrims and strangers upon the earth. The earth. So my challenge to you is don't get comfortable. Don't get comfortable, brothers and sisters. Stay awake. Stay awake. God has a work for you to do. God has a ministry for each and every one of you. Stay awake. Stay awake, because now is not the time to fall asleep. It's dangerous to fall asleep. In fact, those ones who are part of his kingdom, his true children, are the ones that are waiting, that are watching. Now that word, watch, in the Greek is, I'm not a Greek scholar, so you have to forgive me. What's that? Gregoreo, yeah. To keep awake. To keep awake, to watch. Literally or figuratively, to be vigilant. Watch or to be watchful. To give strict attention to, be cautious, active to take heed, lest through remission and indolence some destructive calamity suddenly overtake one. So the definition is to watch, to pay attention, because you don't know what calamity could come. In fact, we're told in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, turn with me there, that this calamity is going to come all of the sudden. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Verse 7. For they that sleep in the night, and they that be drunken are drunken in the night. It says those that are sleeping, when do they sleep? In the night. Right? Nighttime. You're supposed to be sleeping, right? Sleep in the nighttime. But God calls us to be awake during the night. Because, spiritually speaking, right. Let's go to verse 1. But of the times and seasons Brethren, you have no need that I write unto you, for yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. Now we have this idea, as Adventist brothers and sisters, we understand prophecy. We understand prophecy. I believe we have the correct understanding. Now there's a lot of different interpretations that are coming in, but we have the correct understanding of prophecy. And because of that, in a sense, we think we know what's going to happen. And that kind of gives us a feeling of security, of safety. Like, oh, I know what's going to happen. I'm waiting for Sunday law. Yeah, when that comes, and I'll be prepared. It's too late. It's too late by then. Right? We think we know. And we do. We know better than anybody else, but I don't know if we are actually prepared for what is going to happen. It says it's going to happen suddenly. Suddenly. That's what it says right there. Sudden destruction comes. That's why we need to be ready at any moment. We need to be ready at any moment. Sudden destruction. Verse 4, but ye, brethren, are not in the darkness, and that day should overtake you as a thief. You are all children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. Therefore, let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. Let us watch and be sober. Now, if you're awake, your eyes are open. It says, you're children of the day, children of the light. You don't love the darkness, you love the light. Because your eyes are open. Now, what do eyes represent? Ephesians chapter 1. Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 18. The eyes of your, what? Understanding. Being enlightened, that you may know what is the hope of the calling and what is the riches of the glory and inheritance of the saints. So he says, your eyes are like understanding. Your eyes are connected to your mind. It's through your mind that we understand. So figuratively, symbolically, when your eyes are open, light is coming in, and you understand. It's a knowledge. It's an understanding. It's wisdom. And so we need to have our understanding enlightened. Understanding of the times that we live in. Understanding of the condition of the church. We need to understand about the city and the tower and the creeds. We need to understand what is the truth according to the Bible. We need to understand the plan of Satan. We need to understand history. We need to understand that the midnight cry was to illuminate the path of God's people all the way to the very end of the city. Our eyes need to be open. Eyes need to be open. Because if you read in, what is that one? 1 Corinthians chapter 4. There is one that wants to blind us. 2 Corinthians chapter 3. It says, but if our, chapter 4, verse 3. But if our gospel be hid, it is hid to them that are lost, in whom the God of this world, that's Satan, hath blinded the minds. Blinded the minds. So you see the connection between the eyes and the mind. Blinded the mind. So there is a being, an enemy in this world called the God of this world that is trying to blind people's eyes, trying to get them to sleep. Trying to blind people's eyes so that they will not see. And that it says, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, oh, by the way, who's the image of God, because he's the Son of God, and he's trying to blind people's eyes to that fact, should shine upon them. So we have an enemy that is trying to blind the eyes, the minds of men and women today, and trying to shut out the truth and keep them deceived. Keep them deceived. I often think of the second vision that Ellen White had. The first vision was the narrow way. You're familiar with that one, the narrow way. I shared a little bit about that last night. That was in December of 1844. In February of 1845. She had a vision, and she says, I saw a throne, and on the throne sat the Father and the Son. And then she goes on to explain how what she saw was an explanation of the midnight cry. And she saw Christ, she saw the Father get up and move into the most holy place. Then Christ followed, and there was a group of people that separated from this other group of people, and their attention was in the most holy place. Right? You're familiar with that vision. Yes. And their focus was on what was happening in the most holy place. See, that was the Adventists. The group that they separated from, that was those that were fallen, the fallen churches. Now, what's interesting is she saw those that were fixed into the most holy place, said, Father, give us thy Spirit. A light passed from the Father to the Son, and then Jesus Christ breathed on them the Holy Ghost. So, if anybody says that the Father, Son, that we didn't have a correct understanding, she saw the Father, the Son, and the Spirit of Christ in vision from the very beginning. It was established by vision. By vision. People want to obscure that fact. But it was established by vision. Why do you think they were all non-Trinitarians? Because why they were all non-Trinitarians? Because she saw in vision a Father, a Son, and the Spirit, Jesus Christ, breathing on them His Spirit. The Spirit of, like I said this morning, that He received from the Father, the light.
Where's that story located?
That vision. It's a vision, yeah. It's in early writings, right? And that's where I'm getting to. It's in early writings, but it was published 2 other places. It was self-published in 2. Actually, there was 2 articles called Broadsides, I believe, which was one of the first 2 that they published. Yeah, and then there's another in the Daystar, and it was in the Daystar was an Advent pioneer, an Adventist at that time, Millerite publication. I think the editor was Enoch Jacobs. And Ellen White sent him her first vision, because he was getting off into spiritualism, and he received the vision and he published it. And she writes him back and says, hey, if I would have known that you would have published it, I would have added to it, and I would have told you about this other vision that I had that explained the midnight cry. And because he was getting off into the idea that the midnight cry was Jesus coming spiritually into their hearts. But she saw in vision what the events of the midnight cry and the most holy place and what was happening in the sanctuary. But nevertheless, she saw the Father, the Son, and Jesus Christ breathe His Spirit, and they breathed the Holy Ghost upon them. That's not a Trinity, by the way. It's not a Trinity. So that was established early on in vision. What I was getting to is there was a piece of information in these other 2, Daystar and Broadsides, that's actually not in early writings. I don't have it on me right here, but you can look it up. And it's essentially at the end where she saw that those that did not move or focus into the most holy place, basically fallen Babylon, they prayed, Father, give us thy Spirit. And Satan was beside the throne, and he breathed on them. He breathed on them, and they received an unholy influence. Now, in early writings, it says that his object was to deceive and draw back God's children. Which ones? You see, the ones, or the Adventists, that had moved or their focus shifted into the most holy place. The Adventists that had accepted the midnight cry, the come out of Babylon, Seventh-day Adventist. Seventh-day Adventist. His object was to deceive and draw back those ones. And the piece of information that's not in early writings, she says, I saw one by one leave the company and join those ones. And immediately they received the unholy influence of Satan. See, she saw an apostasy one by one by one, people leaving the Advent message, leaving and abandoning the sanctuary message. She saw that from the very beginning. It's very fascinating. That's why I think the history and her visions are very important. And that's what we see in Revelation. Turn with me to Revelation chapter 3. Stay awake. Stay awake. Literally, because I know you're tired from lunch, but stay awake. This is a wake-up call. This is a wake-up call. Do I need to give a louder cry? Is that what you said? Do I need to cry louder? I don't want to be shouting here. Revelation chapter 3, verse 17. Because thou sayest, I am rich and increase with goods, and have need of how much? Nothing. And knowest not that thou art wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. So they're blind. So can Laodicea see? No. I'm tempted to say some thoughts about Laodicea. Can Laodicea see? No. What is Laodicea's problem? They have need of nothing. They think that self-righteousness. They think they have need of nothing.
But in reality, they have need of everything.
They have need of everything.
They have need of nothing.
Right. Now, what would you call a person? What's another word for a person that they think they've arrived? They think they've got it. Pharisee, right? Absolutely. They have self-righteousness. They think they don't need anything. There's a certain word I'm thinking of. Deceived, yes. Yes, but that's not the word. Another word. Come on now. Egocentric, closer. But it starts with a P. I don't want to give it away. Pride. Right. There's a statement, I'd have to go find it in Steps of Christ, but a number of years ago I came across it. She talks about some of the grosser sins. You know, people fall into some of the grosser sins, alcoholism, things like that, while pride and selfishness go unrebuked. It says, but those are especially offensive to God. Especially offensive to God. Because pride feels no need. And thus it shuts the heart out from Christ. That's the Laodicean condition. Spiritual pride. Laodicea has spiritual pride. Now what's fascinating about Laodicea is, what does she say about herself? What does she say about herself? I'm rich. I'm increased with goods. Have need of nothing. Like, I'm good. Do you know there's two witnesses here in Laodicea, the message to the Laodiceans? You have the faithful and true witness. I always find it fascinating that it says, I'm the faithful and true witness. That's in verse 14. Faithful and true witness. And then you have another witness. Who's the other witness in Laodicea? Laodicea, right? You have the true witness, and then you have Laodicea witnessing about herself, saying, I am increased with goods. I'm rich, increased with goods, and have need of nothing. Dare I say, I'm the last church? I'm a part of the remnant?
There are many that almost like bragging that they're the Laodicean church.
Absolutely. That's nothing to brag about.
No.
It's nothing to brag about. You know why? Because Laodicea is witnessing about herself. Is that a true witness or a false witness? That's a false witness. Laodicea is a false witness. Think about that. Now, is a false witness or bearing a false witness violating one of the commandments? Yeah. Absolutely. So if you're violating the commandments, can you be a part of the remnant? How can you be a remnant? And the remnant are those that keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. How can you say that I am part of the remnant, I'm keeping the commandments of God, yet you're violating, you're bearing a false witness about yourself? I'm sorry, maybe you disagree, but Laodicea is not the remnant. Laodicea is not the remnant. Philadelphia, I believe, is the remnant. Philadelphia, it has to be. Because there is, turn with me to Revelation chapter 3, verse 8. Verse 8. I know thy works, behold, I have set before thee an open door. And no man can shut it, for thou hast a little strength. So there is an open door. What is that door? You read in the spirit of prophecy, that door, because it talks about a door that was shut and a door that is open. What's that? The way into the most holy place. So the door that was shut was the salvation in the holy place, and the door that is open is the door into the most holy place. So salvation today, now, present truth, is that which takes place in the most holy place of the sanctuary in heaven. That is present truth. And that door, at this, as far as I know, is still open. It's still, I don't believe there's still time. Right? That is the door that's open. That door is still open. No man can shut it. Right? That door is still open for you and I. And when we enter into that door, what happens? Verse 12. Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God. He shall go no more out. And I will write upon him the name of my God. That sounds very familiar to Revelation 14:1, who have the Father's name in their foreheads. In the name of the city of my God, which is the New Jerusalem, which cometh down from heaven from my God. And I will write upon him my new name. I believe that door is still open. I don't see how in the world a false witness can be the remnant. That's a violation of the commandments. That's a violation of the commandments. And also, Christ, in verse 20, says, Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in. Christ is on the outside. How can you say that I'm a part of keep the commandments without Christ? You can't keep the commandments while Christ is on the outside of the heart. The only way to keep the commandments of God is to have the faith of Jesus, which is Him inside of us. And that's the only way. That's the only way. Last one, Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 14. Wherefore he saith, Awake thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light. Christ shall give thee light. I believe we... What's that?
It must be translated, shine upon thee.
Shine upon thee. There is today, I believe that Christ, through His Spirit, is working amongst His people, and there is awakening happening. In the last 2 years, God is doing something amongst His people. I see the Spirit of God moving. Now, many people will deny it, say it's fanaticism. They will say all sorts of other things. But there is no doubt in my mind that the Spirit of God is moving, because now is the time. Now is the time. It's not the time to be asleep. You know, those that are asleep cannot discern the moving of the Spirit of God. But He is moving. Yeah, the Spirit of God is moving upon His people. And I believe what we are seeing, I believe it's happening, is a repetition of the three angels' messages, that they're going out again. I believe that we are seeing Revelation chapter 18, verse 1. And the light being, the earth being filled with His glory, being filled with His glory. I believe that's what we see. And I think the next thing on the horizon, is that Revelation chapter 18, verse 2. That those that reject the moving of the Spirit, those that reject it, as those that rejected the first angel's message, the call is going to come. If you reject the moving of the Spirit and the work of the Spirit, then Revelation 18:2 will apply, which is Babylon is fallen. And I think that's the time that we're living in. And we need to be awake. We need to discern how God is moving. We need to discern the Word. We need to discern prophecy and the world events. I believe it's all coming together. And now is the time to not be a part of those disciples that were sleeping, the sleeping church, when the day of visitation is nigh. Christ is our example. He says to watch and pray over and over again. And we need to follow his example. We need to have him abiding in us so that he can do the same thing during the hour of his judgment. He can do the same thing in us so that you and I will be prepared.
Thank you for watching this video from Line of Truth Ministries. You can help get this timely and important video out by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Also, don't forget to check out our website, lineoftruth.org.